The winter of 1884 arrived early in the northern Rockies, sealing the high country beneath snow before the last freight wagons had cleared the passes. By the first week of November, ice covered the shallow creeks, elk moved down from the ridges, and every cabin owner with sense counted flour, lamp oil, and firewood twice. Far above the nearest town, where the territorial road narrowed between granite walls and dark stands of pine, Eben Sayer operated a small trapping and supply outpost known as Sayer Station. It was not a station in the grand Eastern meaning of the word. There were no polished counters, no brass lamps, and no regular schedule. It consisted of a long timber cabin, a smokehouse, a stable, 2 sheds, and a rough bridge crossing Granite Creek. Travelers used it because the next shelter lay almost 30 miles beyond Elk Pass. Trappers traded pelts there. Freight drivers bought oats and bacon. Prospectors stopped for coffee, directions, and warnings about weather that could kill them before sundown. Eben had built most of it with his own hands. He had also spent nearly 7 years living there alone. People in the lower settlements had developed stories about him. Some said he had once been married and lost his wife in childbirth. Others claimed he had killed a man in Wyoming and fled north. A few insisted he kept gold buried beneath the stable. None of those stories was true. The truth was less dramatic and more difficult to explain. Eben had been raised on a small farm in Vermont, the younger of 2 sons. His older brother inherited the land. Eben inherited his father's old rifle, $23, and the understanding that there was no longer enough room for him at home. He traveled west as a hired hand, then worked in lumber camps, freight yards, and mining settlements. He learned how to read weather from the shape of clouds and how to repair a broken wagon wheel with green wood and wire. He discovered that he preferred mountains to crowded streets and practical speech to polite conversation. For a time, he partnered with a trapper named Silas Morrow. Together, they found the abandoned cabin beside Granite Creek and recognized the value of its location. The road through Elk Pass was dangerous, but traffic was increasing. New mining camps needed food, tools, and mail. The 2 men repaired the cabin, built a bridge, and began selling supplies. Silas died during their 3rd winter when a shelf of snow broke loose above a trapline. Eben found him the following morning beneath a shallow drift, still holding the broken shaft of his snowshoe. After that, Eben worked alone. He told himself solitude suited him. It allowed no arguments, no disappointments, and no promises he might fail to keep. Yet every winter the work became heavier. There were animals to feed, meals to prepare, hides to stretch, travelers to shelter, accounts to keep, and roofs to clear. During storms, he sometimes went 2 days without sleeping. By the summer of 1884, even Eben admitted that the station required more than 1 pair of hands. He needed someone who could cook for travelers, tend the garden, manage supplies, and keep the outpost operating while he checked traps or hauled goods from town. Hiring a seasonal worker was expensive. Most men who came north were searching for mines, land, or quick wages. Few stayed after the first serious snow. A merchant passing through suggested that Eben advertise for a wife. "You need somebody with a reason to remain," the merchant told him. "A hired man can walk away. A wife builds something." Eben disliked the cold business of the idea, but he could not deny its practicality. He wrote a short notice and sent it to newspapers in several eastern cities. Mountain station owner, 38, seeks capable woman of good character for marriage and shared work. Must be prepared for isolation, severe winters, cooking, livestock, and difficult travel. Honest correspondence expected. He received 11 replies. 2 asked how much land he owned. 1 wanted money for a train ticket and a new wardrobe. Another included a photograph so carefully arranged that Eben suspected the woman had never stood near an animal larger than a house cat. Then a letter arrived from Ottilie Baur. Her handwriting was square and controlled. She did not ask whether he was handsome. She asked how many travelers he sheltered, how much flour he stored for winter, whether the station had a proper oven, and how often the road became impassable. She wrote that she was 31 years old and had worked most of her life in boarding house kitchens. She knew how to preserve meat, stretch meals, manage accounts, and feed large numbers of people without waste. She admitted she had little experience riding horses, but said she was willing to learn. Her letter was practical, direct, and free of sentiment. Eben answered. During the next 3 months, they exchanged 6 letters. Ottilie told him about her work, but very little about her appearance. Eben did not ask. He formed an image without realizing he had done so. A narrow, quick-moving woman with weathered hands and the wiry strength of someone raised on a farm. That imagined woman was standing in his mind when the real Ottilie Baur stepped down from a freight wagon during the first snow of November. Ottilie had not been raised on a farm. She had been born in Milwaukee, the daughter of a cooper and a laundress. Her father repaired barrels for breweries until an accident crushed 2 fingers on his right hand. After that, he worked irregularly and drank more than the family could afford. Ottilie's mother took in washing. By the age of 10, Ottilie could lift a wet sheet from a boiling tub with a wooden paddle and carry baskets that grown women complained were too heavy. At 13, she began working in the kitchen of a boarding house near the railroad yards. The kitchen became her education. She learned that a pot of soup could be extended without tasting thin if onions were browned first. She learned that stale bread could become dumplings, pudding, stuffing, or crumbs. She learned to judge oven heat with the back of her hand and to divide one roast among 20 hungry laborers. She also learned that people believed a large woman should apologize for occupying space. Ottilie had always been heavy. By adulthood, she stood a little above average height, with broad shoulders, thick arms, wide hips, and sturdy legs strengthened by years of carrying coal, flour sacks, wash water, and iron pots. Her round face made her appear younger than she was, though there was nothing childish in her steady grey-blue eyes. Strangers often mistook her strength for clumsiness. Men laughed when floorboards creaked beneath her. Women offered advice about reducing meals, as though Ottilie had spent her life stealing cakes instead of preparing them for others. She rarely argued. She simply remembered. At 24, she became head cook at a boarding house, operated by a widow named Mrs. Henshaw. Ottilie managed breakfast before dawn, supper after dark, and every crisis between. When a cook-stove chimney caught fire, she smothered it with wet blankets. When influenza spread through the neighborhood, she prepared broth and carried it from room to room. When suppliers raised prices, she found better ones. Mrs. Henshaw trusted her with the accounts and promised that one day Ottilie might buy into the business. That promise lasted until Mrs. Henshaw's nephew arrived from Ohio. He had no experience running a boarding house, but he had a mustache, a loud voice, and the certainty that ownership belonged naturally to him. Within months, he began taking money from the cash box. When Ottilie confronted him, he accused her of overstepping her place. Mrs. Henshaw, frightened of family scandal, sided with her nephew. Ottilie left with 2 dresses, $61, and the painful realization that 14 years of dependable work had earned her no security. She could have found another kitchen. There were always kitchens. But for the first time, the thought of spending another decade in a hot basement while someone else owned the building felt unbearable. Then she saw Eben Sayer's advertisement. Her friends warned her that the man might be cruel, dishonest, or worse. Ottilie understood the risk. She also understood the risk of remaining where every path led to another person's stove. She wrote to him because his advertisement did not ask for beauty, youth, or obedience. It asked for capability. When his final letter offered to pay the remaining cost of her journey, she accepted. The trip west took nearly 2 weeks. Rail carried her across Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the Dakota Plains. After the railroad ended, she traveled by stage and then by freight wagon. The last driver, a trader named Casimir Drost, met her in a muddy settlement called Barlow's Fork. Casimir was a compact, silver-bearded man who spoke slowly and watched everything. You are going to Sayer Station? He asked. Yes. You know the pass is nearly closed. Mr. Sayer wrote that winter comes early. He did not exaggerate. Casimir studied her trunk and the heavy traveling bag at her feet. Did Sayer tell you about Wilfred Quill? No. Casimir gave a quiet grunt. Then Sayer believes silence can make a problem smaller. What kind of problem? The expensive kind. He offered no further explanation until they were several miles outside town. Wilfred Quill owned the largest trading operation in the region. His warehouse supplied mining camps, railroad crews, and isolated ranches. He extended credit at high interest and collected debts without patience. Quill wanted control of Elk Pass because freight moving through it was increasing. Sayer Station stood at the safest crossing of Granite Creek and offered travelers an alternative to Quill's newer trading post farther south. Quill believes every road should end at his counter, Casimir said. Eben believes a man should be able to cross a mountain without paying tribute. They disagree. Has Mr. Quill tried to buy the station? 3 times. And Mr. Sayer refused? 3 times. Casimir looked toward the mountains, where clouds had swallowed the higher peaks. Men like Quill do not always recognize refusal as an answer. By late afternoon, the freight wagon reached Granite Creek. Snow had begun falling in thick, wet flakes. The bridge ahead leaned slightly but appeared solid. Beyond it stood the station, smoke rising from a stone chimney. Eben came out of the stable when he heard the wagon. He wore a dark wool coat, a faded hat, and a beard trimmed with more practicality than care. He was tall without being imposing, lean through the shoulders, and marked by years of cold weather. A pale line crossed one eyebrow, where an old injury had left the hair divided. His eyes moved first to Casimir, then to the wagon, then to Ottilie. He stopped walking. Ottilie knew that expression. She had seen it on the faces of men who expected someone smaller. Casimir climbed down. Delivered in good condition, he said. Though the weather tried to argue, Eben did not answer immediately. Ottilie stepped from the wagon without assistance. Her boots sank into the soft ground. She straightened her coat and faced him. Mr. Sayer? Yes. I am Ottilie Baur. I can see that. The words were not openly rude, but his disappointment stood between them as plainly as a third person. Ottilie glanced at the long cabin, the stable, and the bridge. Your letters described a colder welcome. A surprised sound came from Casimir that might have been a laugh. Eben's expression tightened. I described the weather. You described many things, not all of them accurately. Casimir lowered Ottilie's trunk. I should leave before dark, he said. He gave Eben a pointed look. You have a guest. Eben's jaw moved. I know what I have. Ottilie heard the words. So did Casimir. The trader's face lost its amusement. See that you remember she crossed half a country because she trusted your letters. Then he climbed back onto the wagon and drove away. Eben carried Ottilie's trunk inside. He did it alone, but she noticed the effort he took to hide. The main room was large and functional. A stone hearth occupied one wall. Shelves held tools, jars, coffee, ammunition, and folded blankets. A long table stood near the kitchen. 2 narrow rooms opened from the back, and a loft ran above them. The room was not dirty, but it was poorly ordered. Flour sacks sat too close to the damp north wall. Onions had begun sprouting beside the stove. Salt pork hung where heat would shorten its storage life. A ledger lay open beneath an oil lamp, spotted with grease. Ottilie removed her gloves. How many people are you expecting this winter? Few after the pass closes. How few? I do not know. How many animals? 2 horses, 3 mules, 6 goats, and chickens. How much hay? Enough. She turned to him. That is not a quantity. His face hardened. We need to speak plainly. I have been trying. Eben pulled out a chair but did not sit. When I placed the notice, I was looking for a wife capable of mountain work. Ottilie held his gaze. He continued. The trail here is steep. Snow can reach the windows. There are days when a person must travel 10 miles on snowshoes or climb a ridge carrying supplies. You believe I cannot do those things. I believe you have never done them. That is true. And winter is not a forgiving teacher. No teacher ever has been. He looked away. briefly frustrated. I imagined someone different, smaller, more accustomed to the country. You imagined smaller. Eben did not deny it. Ottilie felt the old humiliation rise, hot and familiar. She forced it down before it reached her voice. I described my experience honestly. You did. I asked what the work required. You did. You chose to pay for my passage. Yes. Then this mistake belongs more to your imagination than to my letters. Eben looked at her again. For a moment, something like shame appeared in his face. It did not last. The pass may close tonight, he said. I cannot send you back now. How generous. You can remain through winter. The station needs a cook. In spring, I will pay your fare wherever you wish to go. Ottilie stood very still. She had traveled more than 1,500 miles to become a partner in a life. He was offering seasonal employment and dismissal. Where will I sleep? The room beside the kitchen. What wages? He blinked. Wages? You have decided I am an employee. Employees are paid. Eben studied her, perhaps realizing that the woman he had mistaken for helplessness had brought a sharper edge than he expected. $20 a month, room and board. 30, 25, and half of any profit earned from meals served to travelers. That is my station, and my cooking. They settled at $25 a month, and 1/3 of meal profits. It was not the future Ottilie had imagined, but it was a position she understood. Work could be measured. Accounts could be kept. Spring would come whether Eben respected her or not. The following morning he woke before dawn and found the kitchen already warm. Ottilie had moved the flour away from the damp wall, sorted the onions, cleaned the stove, and prepared biscuits, eggs, and fried salt pork. A pot of beans soaked beside the hearth. The ledger had been wiped clean and placed on a shelf. Eben stood in the doorway. You rearranged everything. Yes, I knew where it was. So did the mice. He glanced toward the floor. Ottilie pointed to a torn sack. They consumed almost 3 pounds of grain. I found droppings near the molasses. Eben frowned. There were no mice last week. Mice rarely announce their arrival. She placed a plate on the table. He ate without compliment, but he finished every bite. Over the next 10 days, Ottilie learned the rhythms of the station. She rose before Eben, fed the stove, measured grain, checked water, and prepared breakfast. She inventoried every jar, sack, and barrel. She discovered that Eben had enough dried beans for 4 months, but less flour than he believed. The goats needed more hay than he had stored, and the chickens were eating grain too valuable to waste. She began mixing their feed with boiled potato peelings, vegetable scraps, and crushed oats. She also learned that mountain work was not one skill, but 100 small ones. Eben showed her how to fasten snowshoes, read trail markers, and split pine so it dried properly. His instruction was brief and sometimes impatient, but never careless. Ottilie fell twice on her first attempt at snowshoes. The second fall drove her knee into a buried stone. Eben stepped toward her. She held up one hand. I am not injured. You do not know that yet. I know the difference between pain and damage. He waited until she stood, then adjusted the leather binding around her boot. You are placing too much weight on your heels, he said. I have considerable weight to place somewhere. His mouth twitched. It was the first time she saw him nearly smile. She learned faster than he expected. Her balance improved. Her legs, already strong from kitchen work, adapted to climbing. She could carry more firewood than he anticipated, though she lacked his endurance at altitude. When she became breathless, she stopped rather than pretending otherwise. Give me 1 minute, she said, during their third climb above the station. Eben looked down the trail. Weather is moving in, then criticizing my lungs will not move us faster. He waited. After 1 minute, she continued. At the end of November, the first serious trouble came. Eben returned from his eastern trapline with 3 empty traps and a face like cut stone. Animals took the bait? Ottilie asked. Men took the traps. How can you tell? The chains were cut. Who knew where they were? Anyone who followed me. He placed a short length of chain on the table. The final link had been severed cleanly. Ottilie examined it. A proper tool. Yes, quill. Eben looked at her sharply. Casimir talked. He thought I should understand where I had come. Quill has threatened me. That does not prove he stole the traps. Who else benefits? That is not proof either. The next week, a freight driver reached the station after dark, with one wheel cracked and both horses exhausted. He said the southern trail marker had been turned toward Quill's post. I followed it 5 miles before the road vanished, he told Eben. Nearly lost a horse in a wash. Eben went out the next morning and corrected the sign. 2 days later, someone turned it again. Ottilie began recording each incident in the ledger. Eben noticed. What are you writing? Dates? Names? What happened? For what purpose? Memory becomes unreliable when money is involved. He looked at the page. A ledger will not stop Quill. No, but it may stop him from rewriting the past. In early December, Denny Lusk rode into the yard. He was a thick-necked man in a buffalo coat, with a broken nose and pale eyes that never rested in one place. He tied his horse near the stable and entered without knocking. Eben stood from the table. This is private space. Denny looked toward Ottilie, who was kneading bread. I heard you found company. She has a name. So do most things before winter kills them. Ottilie continued kneading. Denny removed his gloves. Mr. Quill sent an offer. $800 for the station, the bridge, and the grazing ground. The answer is no. You have not heard the full offer. The full answer is still no. Denny smiled without humor. Past traffic belongs to the man who can support it. You lost traps. Your bridge needs repair. Your hay roof leaks. One hard winter might leave this place worthless. Then Quill should save his money. Denny's gaze moved to Ottilie again. Your cook planning to stay? Ottilie pressed the dough down once, hard. My plans are not your concern. No offense intended. You intended exactly as much as you believed you could afford. Eben looked at her, then back at Denny. The enforcer's smile disappeared. Spring changes things, Denny said. Men who refuse good terms in winter often accept worse ones after the thaw. He put on his gloves and left. Eben watched through the window until the horse disappeared among the trees. You should not provoke him, he said. Ottilie covered the dough. He came here to provoke us. Us? This station is currently my place of employment. A faint line appeared between Eben's brows. Currently. She met his eyes. That was your arrangement. Snow deepened through December. The pass closed entirely after a storm buried the eastern road. With traffic reduced, the station should have become quiet. Instead, 5 stranded travelers arrived over the course of 2 weeks. The first were 2 brothers, Caleb and Martin Wren, who had been hauling mining tools when one mule went lame. The second was a schoolteacher named Ruth Bell, traveling to join relatives near Fort Benton. The last were a widower, Samuel Pike, and his 12-year-old daughter, Nora, whose wagon axle had broken 3 miles south of Granite Creek. Eben would not turn anyone away in winter. The guests slept in the loft and on blankets near the hearth. Their arrival strained supplies immediately. Ottilie recalculated everything. She reduced breakfast meat, added beans to stew, and used damaged grain that Eben had planned to discard. She washed it, removed moldy kernels by hand, dried the rest near the stove, and ground it into coarse meal. It will not make good bread, Eben said. It will make food. She combined the meal with mashed beans and onions, forming cakes that browned in goat fat. She boiled bones twice, thickened broth with barley, and flavored it with dried sage, wild onion, and juniper gathered from sheltered slopes. She made nothing luxurious, but no one went hungry. Even the animals survived on her calculations. She cut hay waste by building rough feeding racks from split branches. She simmered damaged oats into mash for the lame mule. She mixed chopped pine tips, willow browse, and stored roots into the goat's feed when hay ran low. Eben watched her manage the station with a discipline he had never applied to his own stores. You ran that boarding house alone, he said one evening. The owner believed she ran it. How many people? Usually 32. More during railroad hiring. That is a great many meals. That is why I asked how much flour you owned. He leaned back in his chair. I thought the question strange. I thought your answer careless. Another almost smile touched his face. Their conversations lengthened after that. Eben told her about Silas and the avalanche. Ottilie told him about Mrs. Henshaw's nephew and the lost promise of ownership. "You should have taken the ledger with you," Eben said. "It belonged to the business. You created it. Work does not become property merely because a person performed it." He looked toward the station walls. "Sometimes it should." Ottilie did not answer, but she remembered the words. In January, Eben found proof that someone had destroyed the supply bridge upriver. The smaller bridge had been used to reach western trap lines. One of its support pins had been removed, causing the center section to collapse under snow. "A flood did not pull that pin," he said. Caleb Wren examined the timber. "Tool marks are fresh." Martin crouched near the bank. "Horse tracks under the pine. One animal, coming from the south." Samuel Pike looked uneasy. "Quill's man passed our camp before the last storm." "Denny?" Ottilie asked. "Broad fellow, broken nose." Eben's face darkened. "We take this to the marshal," Caleb said. "After the pass opens," Eben replied. "Until then, we survive." The sabotage forced him to use a longer route to reach his traps. Ottilie insisted he take one of the Wren brothers. "I have traveled alone for years," Eben said, "and someone has spent weeks interfering with your routes. You think I require guarding? I think pride is poor company in an ambush." Caleb went with him. They returned with 2 stolen traps found beneath brush near the southern trail. Each bore Eben's initials, stamped into the metal. Ottilie wrapped them in cloth and placed them beneath her bed. Eben noticed. "Why there? Denny has already entered this building without permission. He will not search your room. Because he is honorable? Because he is afraid of you." Ottilie looked at him. This time, Eben smiled fully. It changed his face. The severity remained, but warmth moved beneath it, unexpected and almost boyish. Ottilie turned toward the stove before he could see how much the sight affected her. The great storm came on the 19th of February. The morning began with a strange stillness. Smoke refused to rise, flattening over the roof before drifting east. By noon, wind struck the station in violent waves. Snow erased the stable from view, though it stood less than 40 feet from the door. Everyone remained inside except Eben, who crossed the yard twice to check the animals. On his second return, he carried a lantern, even though it was mid-afternoon. "The stable roof is loading unevenly," he said. "If the drift grows, we could lose the west side." "We should clear it now," Caleb said. "No one should climb in this wind." Ottilie looked toward the ceiling as the cabin timbers groaned. "What can be done from below?" "Brace the center beam." The men brought 2 spare posts from the shed and wedged them beneath the stable roof. For several hours, the bracing held. Near dark, a sharp crack sounded outside. One of the horses screamed. Eben reached for his coat. Ottilie stepped between him and the door. "You cannot see the stable. I can follow the rope." A guide rope connected the cabin to the stable for exactly such conditions. "I will go with you." "No, the animals may need moving." "No, you have 2 arms." "And I know the yard." "So do I." Their eyes held. Eben gave her a length of wool cloth. "Tie this over your mouth. Stay on the rope." They entered the storm together. The wind struck Ottilie hard enough to force her sideways. Snow filled every opening in her clothes. She gripped the guide rope with both hands and followed Eben's shape through the white darkness. Inside the stable, one support post had shifted. The roof sagged above the goat's enclosure. Eben moved the animals while Ottilie and Caleb, who had followed despite instructions, reset the brace. They had nearly finished when a deep splitting sound came from beyond the rear wall. Eben turned toward it. The top of an old pine, weakened by wind and ice, broke free and fell across the stable roof. Heavy branches punched through the shingles. One struck the lantern from Eben's hand. The stable went dark. Animals panicked. A horse pulled against its halter. One of the goats escaped between Ottilie's legs. "Outside!" Eben shouted. Caleb forced the main door open. Ottilie pushed the loose animals toward it. Another crack sounded overhead. "Eben!" He was trying to free the second horse when part of the damaged roof collapsed. A timber knocked him down. At the same moment, the pine shifted, and a thick lower branch crashed through the wall, pinning his left leg beneath it. Ottilie reached him first. He was conscious, his face white with pain. "Do not pull," he said through clenched teeth. "Leg may be broken." Caleb crouched beside the branch and tried to lift it. It did not move. "We need an axe," he said. "The roof could come down before you cut through that," Ottilie replied. Snow poured through the broken wall. Wind shook the remaining rafters. She examined the branch. It was too thick to lift by hand, but one end rested on the fallen timber, while the other was trapped beneath the broken wall. The section across Eben's leg needed to rise only several inches. "A lever," she said. Caleb stared at her. "What?" "The spare roof beam. Bring it here." They dragged a 12-foot timber across the floor. Ottilie found a squared block of wood and placed it beside Eben's hip as a fulcrum. She slid one end of the timber beneath the pine branch. Eben gripped her sleeve. "If it slips, it will not. You cannot hold it alone." "I do not intend to." She sent Caleb to the far end of the lever and positioned herself beside him. "On my count, we push down. Eben, when the branch rises, pull backward. My boot is caught." Ottilie knelt and cut the leather near his ankle, loosening it. The roof groaned again. "Now," she said. She and Caleb threw their weight onto the timber. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the beam bent slightly. The fulcrum shifted, and the pine branch lifted less than an inch. "Again," Ottilie said. Caleb changed his grip. Ottilie braced one boot against the stable wall and pressed down with her arms, shoulders, back, and full body weight. The branch rose. Eben dragged himself backward, but his damaged boot caught on splintered wood. "Hold it!" he shouted. Caleb's arms began shaking. Ottilie lowered her shoulder against the lever. Pain burned across her back. Her knees trembled, but her weight kept the beam down. "Free the boot," she said. Eben pulled once more. The torn leather gave way, and his leg came clear. "Move!" Caleb released the lever. Ottilie stepped aside as the branch crashed back to the floor. A rafter fell behind them. They dragged Eben through the storm using a hide sled normally used for firewood. Ottilie took the front rope. Caleb pushed from behind. The distance to the cabin was less than 40 feet, but wind turned it into a blind struggle. Twice, Ottilie sank above her knees. Each time, she rose and pulled again. Inside the cabin, they cut away Eben's trousers. The lower leg was badly bruised and bent at an unnatural angle, but no bone had broken the skin. Samuel Pike had once assisted a doctor at an army post. Under his direction, they straightened the leg and secured it between padded boards. Eben nearly lost consciousness. Ottilie remained beside him. "Breathe," she said. "I am trying. Try without arguing." His eyes opened briefly. Even through pain, he understood the familiar command in her voice. "You came," he whispered. "I said I would." Fever followed 2 days later. It might have come from the injury, exhaustion, or exposure. Whatever the cause, Eben drifted between sleep and confusion while the storm continued. Ottilie managed the station without him. She assigned duties, checked the animals, rationed lamp oil, and kept heat in the main room. She changed the cloths around Eben's leg, watched the color of his toes, and made him drink broth even when he resisted. On the third night, he woke while she was sleeping in a chair beside the bed. Her head had fallen forward. One hand rested near his blanket, ready even in sleep. Eben watched her for a long time. He remembered his first sight of her in the freight wagon and the disappointment he had not bothered to hide. He had looked at her broad body and seen difficulty. He had believed mountain strength came in only one shape: lean, fast, and familiar. Yet Ottilie had kept 7 people and 16 animals fed through a winter he had barely prepared for. She had recorded every act of sabotage, protected his property, learned the trails, and pulled him from a collapsing stable. Her size had not made the rescue miraculous. Her judgment had. She had understood leverage, organized help, and refused panic. Her strength had come from decades of work that Eben had dismissed because it had been performed in kitchens instead of forests. When Ottilie woke, she found him looking at her. "How long have you been awake?" "Long enough." She touched his forehead. His fever had eased. You are cooler. You saved my life. Caleb helped. You found the way. The tree was lifted by a timber and a fulcrum. And you. She withdrew her hand. You should rest. Ottilie. There was something different in his voice. She waited. I was wrong. About which matter? Most of them. Despite her exhaustion, she almost smiled. He continued. When you arrived, I saw someone who did not match the picture I had made. I treated my own expectation as though it were a promise you had broken. Yes. I believed unfamiliar strength was weakness. Yes. You need not agree so quickly. I have waited 3 months to hear you say it. A breath of laughter escaped him, followed by a wince. Ottilie adjusted his blanket. He looked at her scarred hands. Spring does not have to end your place here. That was the agreement. I would change it. Fever encourages foolish promises. This is not fever. What is it? Eben hesitated. He had spent years reducing every problem to labor, distance, cost, or weather. The truth before him could not be measured that way. Respect, he said at last, and gratitude, more than I know how to name while lying in a bed unable to put on my own boot. Ottilie's expression softened, but she did not rescue him from the discomfort. Then name it when you can stand. By early March, the storm season began to loosen its grip. Eben could move with crutches. The travelers repaired the stable and cleared the road near the station. The shared hardship changed the household. Ruth Bell taught Nora Pike her lessons at the long table. Caleb and Martin repaired harnesses. Samuel handled the animals. Ottilie directed meals and supplies with the authority of a quartermaster. Eben, forced to observe rather than command, saw what the station became under her management. It was warmer, cleaner, and more profitable, even while sheltering stranded travelers. Ottilie charged those who could pay and recorded debts for those who could not. She wasted nothing. She also began planning a larger garden, a smokehouse repair, and shelves for supplies travelers requested most often. You have plans for a woman leaving in spring, Eben said one evening. I have plans for a station that requires improvement, whether you remain or not. Good work should outlast the worker. He disliked the answer more than he expected. By April, the snow receded from the lower road. Caleb and Martin departed first, promising to report the damaged bridge and stolen traps. Ruth Bell left with Samuel and Nora after another wagon joined them for the journey. Before leaving, each traveler signed Ottilie's ledger beneath a written statement describing the winter's events. Eben watched them place their names on the page. You expected trouble, he said. I expected Quill. She was right. Wilfred Quill arrived on the second morning of May. He came with Denny Lusk, Marshal Anson Peel, and a banker named Frederick Knoll. 2 hired riders followed behind them. Quill wore a tailored black coat, unsuited to the muddy road. He was a tall man in his 50s, clean-shaven except for narrow side whiskers. His boots were polished, though the lower edges had gathered mud. Marshal Peel looked less comfortable. He was a broad, aging lawman with a sun-browned face and a silver star pinned to his vest. Frederick Knoll carried a leather document case against his chest. Eben met them on the porch, using a cane. Ottilie stood beside him. Quill looked from Eben's injured leg to the repaired stable. I heard Winter treated you poorly. Winter failed to finish the work your man began, Eben replied. Denny shifted in his saddle. Marshal Peel raised one hand. I am here to prevent accusations from becoming gunfire. No one invited a gunfight, Ottilie said. Quill looked at her. Mrs. Sayer, Miss Baur. Ah, the cook, the accountant. Knoll cleared his throat. Mr. Sayer, we have come concerning the legal ownership of this property. Eben's hand tightened around his cane. I own it. Knoll opened his case and removed several folded papers. According to these records, you borrowed $600 from Quill Mercantile 2 years ago, secured by the station and surrounding improvements. The debt matured last October and remains unpaid. I borrowed nothing, Knoll continued, as though he had not spoken. The note grants Mr. Quill possession upon default. He handed a document to Marshal Peel. The marshal examined it. There is a signature, Peel said. It is not mine. It resembles yours. Resemblance is easy to purchase. Quill sighed. Eben, must this become unpleasant? You are injured. Your station is failing. Accept $300 for your personal goods and leave without further debt. Ottilie stepped forward. The station is not failing. Quill's gaze moved over her body with deliberate contempt. I am discussing business. So am I. A kitchen ledger does not establish ownership. No, but it establishes that your supposed loan did not enter the station's accounts. Noel smiled thinly. You were not here 2 years ago. Eben's ledgers were. She went inside and returned carrying 3 books. She opened the oldest to the month shown on the note. Every major purchase and payment is recorded. Lumber, seed, feed, tools, freight fees, bridge repairs. There is no $600 deposit. Perhaps Mr. Sayer neglected to record it, Quill said. Eben's voice was cold. I did not. Noel removed another paper. There is also a deed transfer witnessed by 2 men. Which men? Ottilie asked. Denny Lusk and a clerk formerly employed at my bank. Denny looked toward the creek. Ottilie nodded slowly. Your witnesses are your employee and a man no longer present. Marshal Peel studied the deed. Miss Baur, suspicion is not proof. No, Marshal, but forgery leaves mistakes. She held out her hand. After a pause, Peel gave her the document. Ottilie read it carefully. The paper claimed Eben had signed the transfer at Noel's bank in Barlow's Fork on August 14, 1882. Where were you on that date? She asked Eben. At the Territorial Land Office in Helena. Can anyone prove it? The clerk who registered my final claim. Casimir traveled with me. Quill gave a small laugh. Convenient witnesses. More convenient than your missing clerk? Ottilie asked. She examined the lower page. This seal is wrong. Noel's face changed. Marshal Peel leaned closer. How? The territorial seal on Eben's original claim uses an eagle facing left. This copy faces right. Noel reached for the page. Printing variations occur. Ottilie pulled it back. And the witness date is written in blue commercial ink. Eben's ledgers from the same year use iron gall ink purchased from your bank. You did not begin selling blue ink until last summer. How could you know what my bank sold? Your price circulars are used to line the pantry shelves. For the first time, Quill lost his calm expression. Marshal Peel looked at Noel. Is that true? I cannot recall every item of stock. A wagon rattled on the road behind them. Everyone turned. Casimir Drost drove into the yard with Caleb and Martin Wren seated beside him. Samuel Pike, Ruth Bell, and 2 unfamiliar men rode behind. Denny swore softly. Casimir climbed down. Apologies for arriving after the argument, he said. The road required repair where someone had rolled stones across it. Quill's face hardened. This is private business. Casimir looked around. A marshal, a banker, 2 armed riders, and a forged deed. It appears public enough. One of the unfamiliar men stepped forward. He introduced himself as Thomas Greer, a smith from a mining camp south of the pass. He held up a trap. Denny Lusk sold me 6 of these in December. Said they came from an abandoned line. I noticed the initials after Caleb Wren described the theft. The letters ES were stamped beneath the jaw. Denny dismounted. That proves nothing. Sayer could have sold them. Eben retrieved the wrapped traps Ottilie had hidden. The chains match, he said. Cut from the same set. Thomas Greer produced a short bolt cutter. Lusk left this at my shop when he asked me to sharpen it. Denny's face reddened. Marshal Peel examined the tool, then the severed chain links. Samuel Pike spoke next. My daughter and I saw Lusk near the southern road marker before our axle broke. The marker had been turned toward Quill's station. Caleb described the missing bridge pin and the tracks leading south. Martin produced the pin itself, which he had found hidden beneath brush. Ruth Bell presented copies of Ottilie's ledger statements, signed before any of them had known about Quill's ownership claim. Quill looked at Marshal Peel. Travelers' stories do not cancel a legal instrument. No, Peel said, but forged documents do. The marshal turned toward Frederick Noel. The banker had begun sweating despite the cool air. Where is the clerk who supposedly witnessed this deed? Noel looked at Quill. That single glance was enough. Quill's voice became sharp. "Do not be foolish, Frederick." Noel's composure broke. "You said Sayer would sell once the winter ruined him," he whispered. "You said the paper would never be challenged." Marshal Peel took the document case from his hands. Quill stepped backward. Denny reached toward his coat. Eben moved, but Ottilie caught his arm. Peel drew his revolver before Denny's hand reached the pocket. "Do not," the marshal said. Denny froze. The hired riders wisely kept their hands visible. No shots were fired. Quill and Denny were taken to Barlow's Fork for formal charges related to fraud, theft, and destruction of property. Noel went with them under guard, carrying less dignity than he had brought. Before leaving, Marshal Peel returned Eben's original papers. "The claim stands," he said. "The station is yours." Eben looked toward Ottilie. "Ours," he said. She studied him but did not correct the statement. That evening, after Casimir and the others had eaten, the station filled with a kind of exhausted relief. Caleb played cards with Samuel. Nora helped Ottilie wash dishes. Ruth wrote a letter near the lamp. Eben stood on the porch, looking toward the bridge. Ottilie joined him. The last snow remained in narrow shadows beneath the trees. Granite Creek ran high and loud with meltwater. Beyond it, the road climbed toward Elk Pass, dark against the evening sky. "You said ours," Ottilie said. "I did. Gratitude is not ownership. I know. Neither is affection." He turned toward her. "I know that too." She waited. Eben reached inside his coat and removed a folded paper. "I wrote this with Casimir's help. He knows more law than I do." Ottilie opened it. The document granted her 1/2 ownership of Sayer Station, including the bridge, buildings, livestock, trade goods, and future profits. It also made her jointly responsible for debts and expenses. She read it twice. "This is not a marriage proposal," she said. "No. Good." He looked surprised. "I would not accept property offered only because a man wants a wife," she continued. "A wife can be dismissed in the heart long before she is removed from a house." Eben nodded slowly. "Then accept it because you earned it. I kept people alive. You kept the station alive. You saw what I failed to see. You worked when you had every reason to leave. You protected records I treated carelessly. Half is less than fair, but more than half would leave me unemployed." She looked toward the outbuildings. "Who decides purchases? Both of us. Who controls the ledger? You do. Who chooses when credit is extended? We agree. And if we disagree, we argue until the sensible person wins. That arrangement favors me. I have begun to notice." Ottilie folded the paper. "I will sign it." Eben exhaled, as though he had been holding his breath through the entire conversation. Then he removed his hat. "There is another matter." She raised one eyebrow. "I wanted to ask only after the station was no longer part of the bargain. That is wise. I do not have a speech prepared. That is probably wise too." He looked down at the hat in his hands. "When you arrived, I believed I was offering you a life. I did not understand that you had come prepared to build one. I judged you before you spoke 10 sentences. Since then, you have shown more courage, judgment, discipline, and mercy than any person I have known." Ottilie's expression remained steady, but her eyes softened. Eben continued. "You also correct me in front of strangers, reorganize supplies without permission, and charge travelers more accurately than I would prefer. They eat more than you notice." "I know. Continue." He took a breath. "I love you, not because you saved me, though you did. Not because the station needs you, though it does. I love you because the day is better when you are in it, and because when you are gone from a room, I find reasons to enter the next one." Ottilie looked away toward the creek. For months, she had guarded herself against hope. Hope had been used too often as a promise made by people who expected her labor, but not her presence. Mrs. Henshaw had offered hope. Eben's advertisement had offered hope. Both had changed when ownership became inconvenient. Yet the paper in her hand was not a promise of future worth. It was recognition of work already done. She turned back. "What kind of marriage do you propose?" "A partnership." "With equal say?" "Yes." Separate wages for work performed before profits are divided. Eben blinked. We can discuss that. We are discussing it, he laughed. The sound carried across the porch and into the yard, where Casimir glanced up from the window and smiled. Eben took Ottilie's hand. I propose whatever marriage allows you to remain exactly who you are. That sounds difficult. I have survived one winter of your management. Barely. Then I need the practice. Ottilie studied his face. He was not asking for a servant, a cook, or a grateful woman who would mistake shelter for love. He was asking the person who had challenged him, worked beside him, and refused to become smaller for his comfort. Yes, she said, but the station will need a new name. Eben looked toward the weathered sign above the porch. What do you suggest? Baur and Sayer Station. He considered it. Alphabetical? Accurate. They married 3 weeks later in Barlow's Fork. Ottilie wore a dark blue dress Ruth Bell altered for her. Eben wore his cleanest coat and stood with a cane because his leg had not fully healed. Casimir served as witness. Caleb and Martin brought a wagon-load of lumber as a wedding gift. Samuel and Nora brought apple preserves. There was no grand reception. They returned to the station before dark because 6 freight wagons were expected the following morning. Over the next year, Baur and Sayer Station changed. Ottilie expanded the kitchen and installed shelves high enough to protect food from mice. Eben rebuilt the Western Bridge and marked both roads with signs too heavy to turn without tools. Together they added 2 guest rooms, a covered feed shed, and a second stable. They kept careful records. When travelers could not pay, Ottilie allowed them to work for meals or sign honest debts. When merchants attempted to raise prices unfairly, Eben sent orders elsewhere. The station became known not for luxury, but for reliability. A traveler arriving in a storm knew there would be heat. A hungry child knew there would be food. A frightened newcomer knew Ottilie would ask what was needed before deciding what could be done. Eben never again mistook her size for incapacity. More importantly, he stopped measuring strength only by what he recognized in himself. Ottilie did not become smaller in the mountains. She became less apologetic. She rode well enough, climbed steadily, and learned every route through Elk Pass. She still preferred the kitchen to the trapline, not because one was weaker work, but because it was the work she understood best. She trained 2 hired cooks, managed the station's accounts, and negotiated supply contracts with merchants, who quickly learned that charm would not alter her arithmetic. Years later, travelers still told the story of the winter Wilfred Quill tried to ruin the station and lost his claim to forged paper, patient records, and the testimony of people Ottilie had kept alive. Some versions exaggerated the fallen pine until it became an entire forest. Others claimed Ottilie lifted the tree with her bare hands. She corrected them whenever she heard it. I used a lever, she would say, and Caleb helped. Eben would look at her across the room and add, the lever would still be lying there if she had not known what to do. The truth mattered to Ottilie, because real strength required no legend. She had not become valuable when she saved Eben. She had always been valuable. The rescue only forced others to see what years of judgment had hidden from them. Her broad shoulders had carried flour sacks, sick children, firewood, injured men, and responsibilities that would have exhausted people who mocked her. Her heavy frame had never been evidence of laziness or failure. It was simply the body in which she had learned endurance. Eben's mistake had not been that he expected someone different. Everyone forms pictures of an unknown future. His mistake had been believing his picture mattered more than the person standing before him. Ottilie's victory was not merely winning his love. It was refusing to accept love without respect, shelter without ownership, or gratitude without equality. The mountains taught them both the same lasting lesson. Strength does not always arrive in the shape people expect, and a person's worth cannot be measured by appearance, first impressions, or the narrow roles others assign. True partnership begins when admiration becomes respect, respect becomes trust, and both people are given an equal hand in building the life they share.